Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Thompson, and welcome to Heroes and Villains: Does Gender Change Perception? Throughout this presentation, we will explore gender roles as portrayed by Disney and what impact they have on heroes and villains. We will also take a few minutes and see if gender really can dictate their perception. Before we can look into gender roles, we have to know what they are. So what are gender roles? According to Teresa Thompson and Eugenia Zerbos of the University of Dayton, gender roles are a perceived set of behavior and social norms usually associated with males and females in a given social group or system. These roles allow individuals to refer to certain attitudes or behaviors that shape a person's stereotypical identity. Gender roles vary among different societies and culture, though creativity or time may cause these rules and values to change. Gender roles are often conditioned by outside forces such as household structure, access to resources, specific impacts on the economy, and other local relevant factors. A primary consideration we have to take into account when discussing gender roles is the difference between sex and gender. In Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, Judith Butler states that while sex refers to the biological and anatomical features of an individual, gender refers to a socially constructed set of traits that are routinely given to men and women. These traits can vary from person to person and society to society, therefore giving gender a truly varying definition. Today, however, we are going to look at the gender standards of females and males in the wonderful world of Disney. In Disney, we see three main portrayals of females and three main portrayals of males. Elizabeth Bell has helped us look at the three female types before. These are the teenage heroine, who is young, thin, and beautiful, such as Snow White and Cinderella; the wicked female, who is generally middle-aged and authoritative, yearning for something she no longer has or never had, such as Ursula and Queen Grimhilda; and the maternal elder figure that is generally older, comical, and nurturing, such as the fairy godmother in Cinderella or Grandmother Willow in Pocahontas. Brittany Hibbler looked closely at the male side of the coin in Disney and found that there were generally three types of males there as well. The brute was most often younger, slender, and fit, muscular, very masculine, and single. Examples are Hercules and Gaston. The go-getter or seeker of power is most often young to middle-aged, slender and fit, but not muscular. If good, more likely to ultimately help others. Examples are Aladdin and Peter Pan. If evil, most likely to trap or torment other characters and to steal, such as Captain Hook or Jafar. The awkward characters were most often the older, elderly, overweight, or short, and primarily didn't show much intelligence. They were most often supporting characters, primarily portrayed as helpers or as comic relief. These character types include those such as Yao from Mulan and Philoctetes from Hercules. Something I noticed while doing this research is that the female characters seem to fit into hero and villain roles based more on their portrayed gender type than that of their male counterparts. The male types can transition between the worlds of heroes and villains quite easily, whereas the females have more specific categorical archetypes. Now that we have covered Disney's portrayal of the masculine and the feminine, let's switch gears and look at the heroes and villains. Disney's portrayal of a hero is a male or female character who is generally brave and kind, and has performed many acts or deeds of heroism. In the hero's story, Kay Ivey states, a hero is generally thought to be a person who goes out and achieves great deeds on behalf of the group. They act selflessly and are usually the central character of their own myth. Not all Disney main characters are heroes, but the majority of Disney movies do contain heroes as their main character. The portrayal of a villain in Disney is much broader in category. Villains are considered to be evil and/or antagonistic characters in Disney works. In Villains, Representations of the Bad Guy, Bridget Orgain states it plainly that in its simplest form the villain is the bad guy, or the exact opposite of the hero. The stereotype of villainy has been played out so often that recently a new kind of bad guy has appeared. The misunderstood bad guy is the premise of several films released within the past few years, including the Disney movies Wreck-It Ralph, The Incredibles, and most recently, Maleficent, the 2014 live-action reimaging of Walt Disney's 1959 animated film Sleeping Beauty. Rather than giving no background history to reasoning for the villain's evil ways, this modern twist shows a realistic approach to villains, making them more human and relatable to the audience. These believable baddies are characters that children can empathize with, making meaning and connections for their own misunderstood actions. This may relate to an interesting fact I discovered. Since The Great Mouse Detective in 1986, it has been a tradition that if a Disney movie is successful at the box office, then the hero or heroine will be marketed predominantly. But if the movie flops, then the villain will be marketed instead. This attempt at making the villain more relatable to the audience may be in direct correlation with marketing and merchandise sales. I wanted to look at these heroes and villains more closely and see if gender related to or affected their perception and portrayal in Disney films. And for that, I needed to do some research. According to Disney Animation Studios, Disney has released 132 animated movies to date. That's an average of almost 2 a year in the 77 years since 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I decided to narrow my view and look more at the popular movies within Disney. A great tool for determining a movie's popularity, among other things, is IMDb, or the Internet Movie Database. IMDb, a subsidiary of Amazon.com, is an online database of information related to films, television programs, and video games. It allows its users to rate any film on a scale of 1 to 10, and the totals are converted into a weighted mean rating that is displayed beside each title, with online filters in place employed to deter ballot stuffing. As of August 1st, 2014, IMDb had nearly 3 million titles, including episodes and games, and 54 million registered users. By using IMDb's list, the highest rated animated feature films with at least 1,000 votes, I compiled a list of the 33 most popular Disney animated movies. These 33 movies make up 25% of the total overall animated movies released by Disney to date. The benefit of using this list is that it allows us to see the overall perception of each film's popularity based on a large scope, as to limit favoritism or bias. I then cross-reference these movies with associated heroes and villains as featured in Disney media, such as related productions, merchandise, etc., and organize them by gender to see how it added up. Out of these 33 movies, there are 95 total heroes and villains. Out of these 95, 52 or 55% are heroes, and 43 or 45% are villains. This seems to be a pretty even number. There is almost always a hero to offset the villain and vice versa. Now, when you introduce gender into the mix, the result becomes quite a bit more interesting. Of the total number of heroes and villains, 67, or almost 71%, are male. Of the total number of heroes, only 14 of them are female. That's 27% of the total heroes. This number reveals an issue that is well known to critics and fans alike. For years, Disney has been criticized over their lack of female heroines in their movies. What's startling is that of the 28 female characters, half are considered heroes and half villains. This, compared with the total number of male heroes, 38, and villains, 29, shows that if you were a Disney female, you'd be almost 10% more likely to be cast as a villain than your male counterpart. The cultural impact this imbalance has had on our society is very apparent, even today. Recently, the American Film Institute, or AFI, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of motion picture history, published a list of the 100 top movie heroes and villains of the last 100 years, called AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains. Selections were made based on the following criteria. The film must be feature-length in narrative format, typically more than 60 minutes in duration. Film must be considered American, clarified as English language with significant creative and/or financial production in the United States. Heroes are characters who prevail in extreme circumstances and dramatize a sense of morality, courage, and purpose. Though they may be flawed, they often sacrifice themselves to show humanity at their best. Villain was a character whose wickedness of mind, character, and are sometimes masked by beauty and nobility, while others rage unmasked. They can be horribly evil or grandiosely funny, but are ultimately tragic. Characters have made cultural impact on American society in a matter of style and substance. Characters elicit strong reactions across time, leaving a legacy that enriches America's film heritage while continuing to inspire contemporary artists and audiences. Of these 100 heroes and villains, only 2 gender-specific Disney characters made either list. Now, before I continue, I want to clarify what I mean by gender-specific. Man made the list of villains as the main antagonist in Bambi, but due to the fact the character is never seen on-screen and is used more as a representation of mankind, I did not include man as a gender-specific Disney character.
The American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains, America's greatest screen characters.
The 2 characters who made the list, both villains, demonstrate society's perception of a villainous female. Coming in at number 39 is Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians, and coming in at number 10 is Queen Grimhilda from Snow White. It is interesting to see why certain characters are entombed on this list. The criteria AFI uses shows that the heroes and villains on this list aren't necessarily there because of their varying degrees of good and evil, but for their overall acceptance by society as a good or a bad person. If this list were based on varying degrees of good or evil, I feel that different Disney heroes and villains could have been placed among this list. There are certainly Disney villains who can be considered more evil than Cruella de Vil and Queen Grimhilda. So what is evil? In The Anatomy of Evil, Dr. Michael Stone explores the concept and realities of evil. In a comprehensive exploration of the personality traits, behavior traits, experiences, and genetic predispositions that portray socially viewed immorality across a wide spectrum, Dr. Stone utilizes a scientific approach to the question, what is evil? He developed a scale of evil based on the measurable data of individuals viewed as evil and used it to formulate a ranking system based on how society views each criteria. This 22-point scale is loosely divided into 6 tiers and gradually elevates in range based on the aforementioned criteria. If we utilize this scale for our two listed Disney villains, neither Cruella de Vil nor Queen Grimhilda ever even approach the criteria required of the first and lowest level. Looking back to our list of villains, we find more than a few Disney villains who could be placed at points along this scale. So if these villains can be classified as more evil than their less villainous counterparts, and a villain is defined as someone who is evil, then should society really consider Cruella de Vil and Queen Grimhilda among the best villains of the last 100 years? Their popularity is really in their perception. These perceptions shape our views on males and females, heroes and villains, more than we think. There are 6 possible comparisons between the 4 gender and role-specific types of characters we have discussed throughout this presentation. Even though each character type is perceived in generally specific ways, many of them do share similarities when compared to each other. When looking along the gender lines, we see that while Hercules and Gaston are both males with similar looks who share personality traits, Gaston is considered a villain while Hercules the hero. Mulan and Ursula may differ in physical appearance, but both share similar behaviors by disguising themselves in an attempt at personal gain. Looking across the spectrum, Pinocchio and Mother Gothel both utilize lies and deceit to get what they want, although in the end it is the act of learning from his mistakes that ultimately redeems Pinocchio. Alice and Captain Hook are both obsessed with capturing an object that has eluded them. In fact, their desire is so consuming that it almost spells death for each of them. Alice at the hands of the Red Queen, and Captain Hook at the jaws of the crocodile. Still, Alice is a hero, and Captain Hook the villain. As we begin to look along the lines of hero and villains, we see instances of gender affecting perception. Scar is considered one of the most evil villains of all time, capable of doing what is necessary to establish himself as king and cement his place in the hierarchy of his newfound kingdom. The Queen of Hearts is just as evil, if not more so. She ranks higher on the scale of evil than Scar does, but her character's perception is considerably less dramatic, even comical at times, as she shouts, "Off with their heads." Is this relaxed portrayal related merely to their difference in gender? The final comparison is that of Beast and Ariel. Both are heroes, both ultimately good, and both change themselves for the person they love. The difference between them is the perception of their changes. When Ariel changes herself for Prince Eric, this change is frowned upon because she gave up on who she was to be with him. She wants to be the best she can be for Eric. If anything is to be learned here, it's to stay true to yourself, right? But what about Beast? He changes himself for Belle in order to fit in. He's giving up on who he is for Belle. He wants to be the best that he can be for her. Now, why is his change considered to be for the better, but Ariel's is for the worse? At the end of the day, they are both true to themselves. Their curses are broken, and they both live happily ever after. Wait a second. Beast was still the man Belle wanted him to be, not the man he really was. And what about Ariel? She decides to stay changed and remain human. Wasn't the moral of these stories supposed to be stay true to yourself? I thought the curses were only lifted when someone loved them for who they were, not who they could be. Gender roles are a tricky thing. If the roles were reversed, would Beast be admonished for changing herself for Prince Belle? Would Ariel's transformation in order to woo Princess Eric be considered heroic or noble? Would Cruella de Vil be seen as a little more evil and be further up AFI's villain list? Would the public's reception of Pocahontas be different if the names and genders were changed to create a completely new story? The answer to these questions can only be speculated on. What we do know is that there are many arguments for gender bias having effect not just on what makes a character a hero or a villain, but how those heroes and villains are perceived. The effects of this inequality are evident throughout our society's history and culture, and will continue to be prevalent as long as we allow them to be. Ian Hacking and Amy Davis both have argued only by inquiring about issues such as this can individuals expect to change the representations of men and women in society. Thank you very much for your time, and may the force be with you.